Simon, hey, how's it going? Long
Hey,
time.
Jim. It's been a minute, but I'm excited to be back with you today.
Yeah. Hey, I just got an email earlier this week
Oh, yeah?
from Google Analytics. They
Okay.
said something about like the universal analytics is going away. Have you
You,
heard
you,
about
j-
this?
I heard about it in the past. Honestly, I'm not surprised if you're still getting those emails, because I still get all kinds of bizarre emails warning me of this impending looming deadline that's coming. What was it, July 1st of 2023, I believe?
Yeah. I guess I should probably get on top of this newfangled analytics thing that they're rolling out. I don't know. Have you heard about it? This GA4 stuff?
I've heard about it, but I've mainly heard about it because everyone and their mother really seems to dislike it. That just seems to be the general vibe. But
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky today because we were joined by someone who knows a lot about this topic. And let me tell you a little bit about her, Simon. She wrote her first line of code in 1982. She
Awesome.
has owned a web design and development shop before the dot-com bubble. She was an early adopter of search engine optimization, close to my heart right there. And she spent more than 20 years in digital marketing and analytics space. She's well known on the speaker circuit, speaking at conferences like MozCon and Search Marketing Summit. And she was nominated as SEO Speaker of the Year in 2018 by Search Engine Land. Very good publication. I used to read that every day back in the good old SEO days. She's currently the president and partner at digital marketing agency Kick Point Inc., and she's the founder and lead instructor of digital marketing training platform Kick Point Playbook. Welcome to the show, Dana DiTomaso.
Thank you so much for
Woo!
having me.
See, the audience at home isn't going to know that I just butchered your name because I'm going to edit that out.
Yes.
Right.
And then I'm going to leave this part in, so it'll be
Yes.
like a little meta joke. Anyway.
Yes.
Then
Just to
people can
confuse them.
guess what
It's
you do.
good. I like to listen to podcasts and be instantly confused.
So yeah,
Uh,
welcome to Measure Up, and we're diving into the topic of Google Analytics 4 here today, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now we may go off on some tangents. We're going to try to not just have like a complaint session for the next 45 minutes, as easy as that may be to do. I know you're going to keep us back on track and show us all of the good things about GA4. But before we dive into that, maybe talk a little bit about how you got into this crazy world of digital marketing and analytics, and how you got into what you're doing now, and talk a little bit about what the work that you're doing at Kickpoint.
Yeah. So you mentioned when I wrote my first line of code, that was on a Texas Instruments computer that you would hook up to your TV. And I took
nice.
out make video games in BASIC out from the library. And then you hook in the little tapes, and I typed out all this code one summer to make my own video games. And
That's so
then my
cool.
dad is a big nerd, so I come by it honestly. And he would bring home extra computer parts from his job at a steel mill. He worked in the
Oh,
computer
that's awesome.
department of the steel
That's
mill. So
amazing.
Two
yeah, and
things
he
you
made
don't
me
think
a
would go together.
386 and like back in, I think I was the first person to have a modem at university when I first started university. So I come by this
Whoa.
honestly, but programming was never really for me, even though I tried that brief foray into BASIC. It was never like totally my jam. So I actually ended up getting a degree in geography. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Geography and
Hmm.
a graduate diploma in ecosystem restoration, which I used for approximately a month. And then I ended up working at a software company in Toronto. And the software company was making Microsoft Access databases to help companies with EPA reporting in the States.
Oh,
So I
wow.
did a lot of training, a lot of travel. It was fun. And then I switched to a CRM company, which was making CRM software and Lotus Notes. I was really making sure I worked at like the vanguard of technology at
Ah,
these
this is
companies.
awesome.
Yeah, and then I got laid off with a really sweet severance package, and I thought I've always been interested in the internet. I'll learn how to make websites, and I did. And so that's what I was doing for a while. And my very first client after I launched her website, she said to me, "How do I get on Google?" And I said, "I don't know. I will get back to you." And I started looking it up, and I was like, "Oh, there's this thing called SEO." And I ran into a bunch of different people's blogs, and one of them was Rand Fishkin's before Moz. This is like
Hmm.
early, like maybe 2000, 2001. So it was just like
Hmm.
his web company at the time. And
It was
I
like
just
him and
started
his
following
mother,
everyone in
right?
the
I
industry.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
him and
Yeah. Yeah.
Jillian.
Him and his
Yeah. So
mom, yeah.
way back when.
Yeah.
And my first conference I went to was SES Toronto when they still had SES, 2004. And after doing SEO for a very long time, I got kind of bored of just doing SEO and decided I'm going to get into this analytics thing. And then analytics kind of took over my life, and here we are.
Well, you're certainly prolific. I think you probably, I hear more from you about what's happening with Google Analytics 4 than I do from Google themselves. And these updates
I think that
are
reflects
coming
more on Google than it does on me.
I don't know. I think it speaks to how plugged into this ecosystem you are. Being able to post about the fact that the admin pane has changed, and then Google didn't pick it up for 3 more days, and I'm just like, wow, okay, that was you were ahead of it, and we all headed toward our documentation, tried to update it rapidly, but no, it's an interesting time. But that's such a cool backstory.
Thank you.
Very
Thanks.
cool.
So yeah, if you so now I live actually out in the middle of nowhere, and I have this plot of land that I'm actually like, maybe we should restore this. So I actually had someone, because I don't know the local plants where I live out on the West Coast now. I grew up in Ontario, and I know Ontario plants. I don't know BC plants. And so we had a restoration person come out to the house and help me identify all the native grasses. And now I'm slowly working on restoring our own property here back to native state. My in-laws are like, it looks messy. That's the point. It's supposed to look messy. Messy
like
is
the
nature,
bees
so.
like messy. Yeah, the bees like it this way.
Appreciate the messiness. Yeah, and then I don't have to mow the lawn. It's great.
Yeah, best of both worlds. I love it.
Yeah.
There's someone in my community, and we have this HOA, and they've gone full native garden. And there was a thing in the HOA, like the HOA newsletter about it, and they're like, this one's okay, but like everyone else has to mow their lawn. And so I'm thinking, like, let's make it a thing. Let's all go fully in on this.
I would love to just like throw a bunch of wildflower seeds in the front yard.
Absolutely.
And be like, okay, I don't have to mow anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wonderful.
That's exactly how it works. Yep.
It occasionally looks pretty, and then 10 months out of the year it looks like a bunch of weeds, but it's natural and I don't have to mow.
Hey, as long as it makes
weeds
the bees happy.
Plants that you don't like. There's no classification for weeds. It's just
right.
whatever I don't want is a weed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So awesome.
As much as I love talking about dandelions and how much they should be classified as flowers instead of weeds, what were we talking about? Oh, the GA4.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. The weed of the analytics space.
Yes, a weed to some, but a flower to others, perhaps.
There you go. So, as we kind of dive into this topic, and again, we have to make sure we don't just like devolve into like a bitch session, right? But because there's plenty to complain about, but there's also things that are good about it, and we want to talk about all of this. But to kind of frame this topic, like how did we get here, right? So I think we've all heard stories about why Google's making this change and how they decided on it. But what are your thoughts here? Like what is the reasoning from Google's side, as much as you know, or just in general, like why do you think we have gotten to a point where like Universal is no more and now we're moving into GA4?
Yeah, I think Google was sitting around in 2000 and thinking, no one's busy with a global pandemic. Let's put out a new version of analytics. Let's force everyone to switch. But I think what actually happened is that it came to a point where the bugs in UA were too much. And they had this other option, which was called Google App and Web. And they, this is better. It's got, the clickstream data that people really want to have. It's got app and web brought together, hence the name. Let's just move everything over to GA4. And then I think what happened was that they were going to save a bunch of money because they're no longer going to be storing the Universal Analytics data. So FYI, if you're listening, July 1st, 2024, got to get your data out of Universal Analytics or it's going to go away. Just note that in your calendar and don't wait until June 30th, 2024 to do this, like a bunch of people did with GA4. And I think that they're going to save a bunch of money, probably ditching all these old servers that have been holding UA. But I think really the technical debt of UA just probably got to be too much. And if you've talked to Google at all, you know that one of the things at Google is you don't necessarily reward people fixing up old stuff. It's about new stuff. And there probably wasn't a lot of, sexiness attached to people fixing up UA, which is why it sort of got sadder and sadder over the years. And I think it certainly had its golden age, which, if you were using it towards the end, you were like, there's so many things that I wish I could do better. People were starting to look at other solutions, like, even things like Amplitude, Snowplow, like there's other analytics products out there that I think were starting to eat into that market. And so Google decided to make the big switch to GA4. And the other half of it too is I think the issues with the European Union and privacy. I think that GDPR Europe was saying you can't do this stuff. And it was cheaper for them to force everyone to move over to GA4 because Google doesn't need to move to GA4. Everyone else has to do the work. So they could just be like, you got to move now. And I think that was probably easier for them to do than to fix up UA to make it comply to EU regulations. 360 got that tiny little grace period beyond what the rest of us, poor people got. But the reality is that like UA had to go for many, many different reasons.
But so if we just click into that, because I think there's a few really interesting pieces. One being obviously cost savings from Google's side, that makes a lot of sense. But the privacy one is a particularly interesting one because broadly speaking, any type of tracking solution that you put out there, in Europe especially, it's an opt-in rather than an opt-out. I'm sure there are lawyers listening being like, no, it's far more complicated than that. But I guess in the broadest terms...
But we're not lawyers here, so let's talk about normal human beings.
Right, exactly. So in the broadest terms, it's something that you need to opt into that tracking. What makes GA4 a more privacy-centric solution than Universal?
Yeah, and it's, I think some of the options are that you can turn things off or on depending upon what you want to do with it. And the cookieless tracking, I think, is a big deal. So for people who don't know, if you're using consent mode and you're saying, don't, collect this data off of people, or, you don't know yet that when I say when consent mode is, you have that consent that pops up and it's actually attached to something. So Google knows, because I see a lot of people are like, I put a pop-up, but it doesn't actually talk to anything. Right. So nothing has changed in terms of tracking. You actually have to connect the two.
Right.
Regardless. So let's say you have this tracking and the person said no, or they haven't said anything yet. You can use cookieless tracking in GA4, which captures some data. There's no cookies. So every page view is like this, a brand new person. There's no user tracking necessarily throughout the session. If they come back again, you have no idea who that person was. So it isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing. So as a marketer, if you're like, I want to know how many people, gave me something, then you get that. But one of the things that is in GA4 is the modeling. And so if you have consent mode turned on and you have 1,000 people who've said yes to tracking, and you have 1,000 people who've said no to tracking, the Google will sort of fill in the blanks in terms of what, those people who said no might have done. Now, do we trust Google to fill in the blanks accurately? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. A lot of the times, especially if you have a smaller client, like it isn't worth it to turn on cookieless tracking because it's going to be enough of your data that it's going to look weird, but it's not enough for you to hit that modeling threshold. So a lot of the time it's like, we're just going to not show any cookies at all until they say yes or no. We're just going to leave it like that. And then the other part of it too, with regards to tracking is Google Signals, which of course, if you want to use GA4 audiences for your marketing, you have to have Google Signals turned on. But just the existence of turning it on may violate the e-privacy directives. So the fact that you can shut it off and you can set your region to be EU, for example, there's more privacy features built into it. But I would say, a lot of people don't necessarily understand or are aware of the nuances of turning on things like signals, and people are just like, I'm just going to turn it all on. It's fine. Like,
sure.
Whoa there.
Yeah.
You don't click all the buttons.
Right. You watched any of these intro to GA4 webinars and they're like, turn Google Signals on. And you're just like, should there be a discussion about this?
A lot of those from an American perspective as well, or Canadian perspective, right? Like I'm in Canada and we don't really have... Yeah, we don't have privacy laws. We have privacy laws for email.
Right.
But that's about it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a matter of people not realizing that places elsewhere have these laws and they have not kidding around amounts of fines associated with these actions. Like GDPR, you get fined a lot if you screw up. So It isn't so much like a slap on the wrist and pay $500. Haha, no one cares about that. It's just a tax on doing business, right? So I think that people don't realize exactly how expensive these violations are. But also, there's nothing that says do this in the documentation. There's no clear, here's exactly how to set up GA4, because also people are worried about liability. You don't want to say do this. You don't want to say do that. Like even in my courses, my videos are like, I'm not a lawyer, but here's how I understand it. But I'm not a lawyer, so please don't sue me if I'm wrong. It's just because I'm not a lawyer. And also every different company has their own tolerance for risk. Their data protection officer is going to have their own tolerance for risk, right? And so all those factors come together to help a company decide. But if you're a smaller organization, like you don't have any of those people, you're kind of screwed when it comes to making these privacy decisions. So I think I get really frustrated when I see people with those GA4 setup things and they're like, turn on Google Signals, everything's fine. It's like, well, then you have thresholding and then you have, and it's, I think that the people are missing out on some of those specific issues. So that part of GA4 is frustrating. I appreciate that they have those features. I just don't think they're well explained.
Ah.
Yeah, I feel like they get in trouble, or at least people ding them because of all of the confusion around the features, right? But
Hmm.
it's almost like it's getting a bad rep for things that are a little bit outside of its control, right? It's like, oh, we need to be able to give you granular control over what you do and don't collect. And we're going to try and do this modeling thing to kind of compensate, like in a, like, I don't think they're trying to do it in a bad way or like nefarious or like, oh, let's make it look like AdWords is giving more credit or whatever. Like they're trying to like mitigate this loss of data by trying to do something better,
Hmm.
right? But in the end, it just leads to more confusion, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because to your point, they don't do a good job of explaining it or being out there in the community and being vocal about things and like making their case. And so they end up saying, everyone says, oh, well, this Google Alexa numbers are never accurate and they're way off and it doesn't match what I saw over here. And it's like, well, they're trying to do some smart stuff and they're dealing with things that you didn't have to deal with before with universal analytics. So it's kind of like apples to oranges comparison, really.
Yeah, well, it's almost like apples to like cars sometimes
Yeah,
because you're
right.
comparing the data, right? But I think you raise a really good point too, where I don't think that Google really understands like how people use analytics on a day to day basis. Like coming at this from the local SEO world originally,
Mm,
Google does not understand how local businesses work. They
mm-mm.
would send out these reps to local U conferences. They don't anymore. I think it's because whoever went to local U ended up getting like moved off to somewhere else because they would say something they were not supposed to. But basic things like temporarily closed or being able to change your office hours, that didn't happen until COVID. And then we finally got this feature that we've been begging for. Like, what if they were a seasonal business? Oh, you had to set it as closed, but there was no way to set it as temporarily closed, just like you would set your hours to nothing. And
Yeah.
just like this basic stuff. If you were a business in California, I'm sure Google My Business, Google Local, Google Places was perfect for you. But if you were literally anywhere else, it was not. And I think that Google really does, unfortunately, have that sort of culture of this works for us, therefore, why can't everyone just be like us?
Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting point there though, and that is entering the industry. There was a moment in time where there were these Google Analytics evangelists from Google, right? There were the Avinash Kaushik's, the Justin Catronis, the Krista Seddons. I
Yep.
don't think we have those folks anymore, right? Has Google just abandoned the evangelist program?
I don't have a good answer for that. I've never actually had like an inside line at Google.
Yeah.
People are like, are you part of the alpha program? No, I'm not. I kind of don't want to be at this point, because I don't want to see stuff before I'm not supposed to. But at
Sure.
the same time, like I do wonder if there is a real, like, no one wants to put themselves in the front lines like that. And certainly I
Mm,
think that, if you think about examples like Matt Cutts, for
sure.
example, who was, the face of Google for SEOs for a long time and received an egregious amount of abuse for being the
Yeah.
face of it. Like I can only imagine what like John Mueller's inbox looks like most of the
Right.
time, right? It's probably pretty gross. And I think that that's because if people are terrible people, people
Sure.
can be really bad if they're like, my site went down and it's your fault personally. But I
Right.
wonder too, if especially with all the GA4 stuff, Google was like, maybe we shouldn't expose some of our very nice team members to the hordes of people who think that GA4 is crap. So
Yeah, that could
that's
be.
probably part of it too.
No one's raising
Well,
their hand for that job.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting one though, right? Because there are so many, what I guess I would frame as community evangelists like yourself, right?
Mhm.
Where you sort of have to then take on this responsibility and go out there and do it, and inevitably it's through the lens of growing your business, or when I'm doing it through growing my business, and that is good, but also it's not tied into Google being that advocacy layer. But we do see it, like Ginny is there for the Google Ads side,
Mhm.
Danny's there for the SEO side in terms of like the liaison approach, but
Mhm.
we don't see that here, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But I know we probably want to dive into, oh, gosh, I mean, everyone out there on the internet really seems to dislike GA4. It's just they can do no right, it would seem. But you have famously gone out there, and I think, maybe it was a little tongue in cheek, but made "I love GA4" stickers. So you've sort of taken this, everyone's zigging and you're zagging. Tell us why you love GA4.
Well, I just love being a contrarian, first off. Uh,
Yeah.
no, I
When
think,
everyone else
I
comes
mean,
back to say, no, I love GA4 now, you're like, no, GA4 is terrible.
it's trash. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think the I Heart GA4 stickers, they did start out as a bit of a joke because
Yeah.
nobody liked GA4. Like, oh, it'll be funny, and I'll just stick it on my lapel when I speak. I think that people hate GA4 because of what we just talked about. Like the education was very poor. the training videos, I remember I had to recertify myself in analytics, and it was maybe 6 months out, I think, from the actual switchover, and they still
Sure.
hadn't updated the exam to be for
Yeah.
GA4.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Yeah.
I feel like it was like a group project, and like 3 of the 4 people didn't show up until the night
Right.
before. And so now we're getting stuff, but again, a lot of it is not necessarily easily accessible.
Right.
And so I think that that's part of the hate, and also it's the user interface left a lot to be desired. I think it still does. I saw something today about how we're finally going to be able to maybe turn on and off filters. That'd be great, on individual reports. I saw something in the
Amazing.
Measure Slack just now. Yeah, that'd be great.
Ugh.
But basic stuff like that is missing. And I think what's happening is that people are taking UA in its final form. It's Ruth Burridi has a great metaphor about it being a Pokemon, and it's just like evolved over the years. And now we're back to like the tiny, like the first evolution again.
Yeah.
And so people are taking the final evolution and comparing it with the first evolution because GA4 is a separate product.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really good metaphor is it's a matter of like, this is a different beast. It's not UA, but slightly different. It is a completely new product. And I think that Google really kind of downplayed that narrative a little bit because they wanted to be like, you can migrate from UA to GA4. Migration implies you could carry your data over. You could not. So many questions like, why can't I move my data from UA to GA4? And some providers were saying, oh yeah, you totally can. No, you can't. Why would you say that? Please don't say that to people, And so that was all really frustrating. And I don't think Google really stepped up to help with those kinds of migration questions and not even like, I hate using even the word migration. It's just like, it wasn't a migration. It was a switch from one product to another product. And so I think that they really messed themselves up there. And then the other thing with regards to user interface, like if you look at the user interface UA, there was all these different reports, right? You would go down there, like all these different options. Those options more or less exist in GA4, but because it's all like you go into a report and then you open up that primary dimension and it's like, oh, here's landing pages and here's all the other stuff that I used to have. Cool. And I don't think people realize that there's so much more hiding in those menus. They were expecting the full suite of options that we had. And of course, you can build that out, and that's a little bit tedious, but you can change that navigation and reports to add in stuff for yourself. I think that that's where people will look at it and they're like, this doesn't have any many features. But the reality is like, it's actually a better product, but people didn't realize that because it looked like crap. I think it's the perfect example of why design is important.
Yeah.
Like a UX person, if you were the UX person working at Google and you're listening to this, I'm really sorry. I bet you had a really difficult job. I don't think UX was prioritized enough in this process. And it was probably just because it was like, oh crap, we got to make this happen now. We don't have time to make it look good. We just got to do things.
It's almost though as if, sorry, Jim, you go.
No, I was just gonna say it's like they're again in this unenviable position of trying to make everyone happy, which is never going to happen because you have the people who just want all of the reports there out of the box. They don't want to have to create their own stuff. They just want it there and they can click on it and there it is. You have other people that want to customize it and have it be as flexible as possible and add this here and that there and have their own custom menus and all that. And like inevitably someone's going to be unhappy with whatever decision they made. And like I agree. I think there's a lot of customizability to it that's really awesome for people like for you and me and Simon who like enjoy playing around with things and tinkering and customizing stuff. But for that mom and pop shop, person who does, wears 10 different hats and today they have to spend 10 minutes on marketing and analytics, like they just want the reports there.
Yeah. And they don't have a person like any of us that they can necessarily call and be like, can you set up reports for me? So some of the work we did do was just helping people get set up with reports. And then like, it's not an ongoing engagement, just like, here's some reports, off you go. We still do that for people to help them just get some reports so that they don't have to think about it. Because I think there's really, as you said, there's two camps. There's I can do anything with this data, so I'm going to put it in a big query and I'm going to, do SQL. And it's like, okay, that's nice for you. And then there's the people who are like, I just want to report. I have these slides actually in my trainings that I do. And option 1 is like, you can do anything you want. So do anything you want. The option 2 is, oh my God, I just need a report, please.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people are bucket 2.
Yeah.
Bucket 1s are very vocal. But
yeah. But it's built for the 10%. This is built for the upper echelon of analytics professionals. It's almost Google saying like, look, we can compete with Adobe in terms of how like the scope of the analytics model that we've developed here. But they have left so much on the table for the 90% of people who don't have the time or energy or resources, quite honestly. But that does bring up an interesting note, and that is there are additive features in GA4 compared to GA3, right? It's not just Google going, here's a new UI that nobody likes. So maybe we could dig into some of those, because that's actually where I do align with the I had GA4 mentality. So what do you see as some of the greatest value adds that have come with GA4 versus GA3?
Oh, the event-based model, like hands
Yes.
down, no question. So if people are like, what does the event-based model mean? Oh, thank you for the sound. I mean, I think if people are wondering what does the event-based model mean, everything in GA4 is an event. You're like, okay, that's nice. I'm used to events in Universal Analytics, which were category, action, label. You couldn't really do much with those. And
Mm,
so the fact that everything is an event now, page view is an event, a form submit's an event, a scroll depth is an event, I could see the CTA is an event. We can capture a lot more engagement data than we could before. So, for example, something that we probably wouldn't have done in Universal Analytics because it was a lot of work was I like to capture when the CTA has been viewed in someone's viewport. Because one of the questions you want to know is my website converting? Well, if they couldn't
mm,
see the CTA, they couldn't convert, could they? But
yes.
it would have been a total pain to record an event every single time a CTA was viewed and then try to somehow, divide that by the number of conversions. I'm not even sure how I would approach that in the UA data model. Like, I think it wouldn't have worked very well. In GA4, that would be extremely simple because you can just look at the different accounts of these different events and see, CTA was viewed, conversion happened, great. That's exactly what the data model is built for. Another example that I use in my workshops a lot of the time is a form submit, and someone wants to know 3 different fields in the form and what people selected. And then we can take the values of that, save them as event parameters, and then in our report, we have different columns for the different parameter values. You can just click on one of the columns and see how the other columns filter by it. You can even see if the channels change based on people selecting one option versus another option for how people got to the site.
Mm,
Like, there's definitely a lot of features that make it so much easier there. And I think that form example is one of the easier ones that I show when I'm trying to convince people that, like, yeah, GA4 is good. How would we have done this universal? We wouldn't have. And look how easy this is to do this and how much more data we get as a result. So I think that event-based model is great. I think that people struggle with getting custom events into GA4. And
mm-hmm.
that's the thing where it's like, well, I don't know how to get these form submits in. This is always the thing, is like form submits. Those are the
Yeah.
killers. It's like every little form system is slightly different, and no one wants to learn data layer pushes, which is fair. And we're like, I hit submit on my form and it recorded a form submit. What do I do about that? Well, you got to turn off the built-in form submit options, and then you got to build your own. And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
part of it has really been exposed for people who just didn't track form submits in Universal Analytics. The fact
Yeah.
that GA4 tracks more out of the box is great, but sometimes it is a double-edged sword because it tracks like too much. And like, look at all these form submits. Well, it's tracking a form submit every time the form is shown on the page for some reason. Like, like that kind of thing has
Right.
happened.
Right.
So I think that that's like the good and the bad of and again, lack of documentation, because Google also doesn't want to get into, here's the 25 different form builders for WordPress. Here's how to set up every single one of them so you can
Right.
record form submits in GA4. They don't really want to do that,
Yeah, although
which is
it's sort of
fair.
interesting. Like they almost took the approach that Heap took with this retroactive tracking approach, where historically the developers have published this form on the website. When are we going to get it tracked? And then you'd submit a ticket and you'd say, a week from today. Great. So we'll just fly blind for the next 2 weeks, and just we won't know if this form's getting any action. Versus the way that it can act now with the enhanced measurement that you're referencing, which is a double-edged sword. But that enhanced measurement, I've found, actually has really engaged a lot of folks who, especially if they don't have the technical resources to
Oh,
really
yeah.
utilize this, they can go and look up the form ID and go, look, I can track forms now, and I haven't had to go through Google
Hmm.
Tag Manager. And I go, that is a value add. That is a really great thing for the average user.
And
Yeah,
I would say
absolutely.
it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because yes, and it's funny because like we were talking earlier about how like, oh, it's so more complicated and it applies, Google Analytics appeals to the 90 or the 10%, the top echelon. And this is an area where it's kind of the opposite, where it's like, oh, every Joe Schmo who doesn't know how to use Google Tag Manager can just go and say, yes, enhanced measurement, turn them all on, which is
Mm-hmm.
great for that reason, so that people can just easily start tracking stuff. But then also, if you have cases where you are tracking in Google Tag Manager and then someone goes into the GA interface and turns on some enhanced measurement, now you don't know, is this being tracked because of what I did over here, or is it being tracked because of what's over here? It kind of makes it hard to
So
Yeah.
if you're worried
troubleshoot.
about that, may I recommend adding a parameter onto every single event you send in Tag Manager and call that parameter like, I can't remember a good name. I'm trying to remember what we call ours, like generator or something like that. And then
Mm,
GTM, for example. And I'll often put in like the actual GTM ID. So the ID of the container plus the version number. So we know
smart.
exactly where that came
Yeah.
from. And then that way we can go in and look and say, oh, this doesn't have a generator. So therefore it, who knows where it came from. And then we can start to diagnose it a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a
No.
tag manager tip for you for the 4% of you listening to this who are like, I love tag manager too.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
honestly, though, a lot of folks do try and get more actively involved within Tag Manager, but it often ends up with more confusion.
Hmm.
Even since the beginning of Tag Manager, it's been one of those things where Google sort of hyped it as like the codeless, or I think they even when it came out, didn't they call it the codeless
Which is a
tracking solution?
lie.
Yeah, which is a bold-faced lie, and I believed that lie, and I was like, I'm going to do all of this, and similar to yourself, I found that hey, I'm not that great at coding, but I know analytics theory and all those pieces, so I know how to work with it. But for a lot of folks, there's still that misconception. So yeah, I look at this and go, okay, that does provide some opportunities here. Um, we did hear a lot about though folks thinking about other platforms. Do you think that is a viable part? Like when people start talking about Adobe, I'm like, yeah, do you have 100K? Like,
Have you
what
used Adobe?
have you used Adobe? It is so complicated.
It's
Yeah,
insane. Yeah, when people complain about GA4, I'm like, have you looked at Adobe lately?
right.
Because yeah, and also expensive. But you
Absolutely.
know what? If you're with an organization that's been with Adobe forever, don't
Yep.
switch for
Right.
funsies. Like it's not. Yeah, that's not. It's not a good time. Just stick with
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah. I mean, and look, I think in the analytics community, there's a degree of snobbery, perhaps,
Oh
from
yes.
folks who are all about, no, I'm all in on Adobe,
Hmm.
CJA for life kind of thing. And I look at it and go, it is the Rolls Royce, but it also requires the maintenance of a Rolls Royce. And there are all these things
Yes.
that the average user will never take into account. And I don't know if I've ever seen a clean Adobe Analytics account because
No.
they're all just overloaded with props and evas, and you're like, where did this thing come from? They're like, we don't know. It's from this index or this, and so I look at that and say, this is a GA4 does present a much cleaner, simpler way to do a lot of these things. That hey, it's cool that
Hmm.
the top 1% is empowered by that, but is GA4 still the way to go? And there were a few other platforms folks were talking about. Do you see any viable alternative to GA4 at this moment?
I think that there are some alternatives for people who don't need to use everything in GA4.
Mm,
So, like one really good one is actually made by people who are quite local to me, Fathom.
okay.
And it's I've used it. It's basic, but in the sense of like you don't need all those bells and whistles. And if you just need to know how many people come to your website and maybe do a thing, then Fathom is probably a good choice for you, or Matomo, or But the second you start using Google Ads, you know,
Yeah.
yes, you can use UTMs to push that information over, but you're not going to get the level of data that you would if you were using a GA4. So that's the problem is like you can use the alternate solutions. I have one client who's like, I miss my old reports. I want to switch to something else. I'm like, well, if you miss your old report, switching to something else is not going to fix that problem
Right.
for you.
Yeah.
Because one of the things he wants is like integration with Google Search Console. Again, like Google talks to Google. Google is not going to talk to something else. But
Right.
if you want a basic solution, you want to get out of the Google ecosystem. Absolutely, there's different options out there. Like we even have, I was playing around with like Amplitude. It's like that's a roll your own kind of analytics solution. We have it running on our website just because I wanted to try it out. But you got to do it all yourself. It's like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people can barely run GA4. They're not going to start creating their own events and setting up their own event schema and everything else and deciding how everything's going to be named. It's not something people do for fun. But I think a lot of times people will look at a solution like a Fathom or a Matomo or a Heap or not Adobe,
Sure.
and be like, screw Google, I'm moving. But
Yeah.
Google, first off, is free. And secondly, it has a lot of the features that you need, especially if you run Google Ads, and a lot of places run Google Ads. So I think that Google does have the market in that way. And so part of it is like, yeah, I know you're not a big fan, but you also just may need to accept that, GA4 is what you're going to have to use. Sorry.
Yeah, and I do want to plug a book of a friend of mine, Jason Packer, who literally wrote the book on Google Analytics for alternatives. So
Mm-hmm.
Ah.
we'll put that link in the show notes. He
Yeah.
just launched that earlier this year. So yeah, there are a lot of viable options. Everything from sort of freemium to paid options. Cheap paid options, pricier paid options, all that stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
there are some options, but when you're used to Google Analytics and it is free and it integrates with all the other GMP Google Marketing Platform products, it's kind of hard to beat that for a lot of people. For a lot of people.
They
Yeah.
do really trade on attrition. I think people just being like, I'm not going to move. I'm just going to stay here, And so I think that it's just like people can't be bothered to stay where like they just can't be bothered to move. And I
Yeah.
think that is one great retention strategy for a lot of SaaS products, Google included. It's like, it's a lot of work to switch. I'm not moving now.
Absolutely.
We're staying here. That's fine. We're just going to hold our nose and deal with it.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a healthcare plan. Like I'm like, the amount of paperwork required to move on.
That.
I know, of course. Of course.
Sorry.
You lucky Canadians. No, it's diabolical. Just going through all the healthcare paperwork and everything. And every time I look at it, I go, I'm never, ever switching insurance providers because it'll take me forever. And look, I think it is the same thing, exactly as you're saying. It's the same thing with analytics. And quite honestly, it would be like if my healthcare plan, it was like, well, we're the only ones that you can get a dermatologist with because of that integration with Google Ads. That is such a key component of this. And that is maybe an interesting piece of, do you think the fact that it is so inherently tied to Google Ads is part of the reason why the transition was so poor? Because there were these sort of competing interests going on within Google at the time?
Possibly, and I am curious to see like how the antitrust lawsuit that's sort of playing out very slowly right now is going to deal, because if Google does, let's see something happens like the big Bell breakup, for example, and they're forced to go off in their own different places. Like, how is GA4 going to pay for itself if it's forced to go off somewhere else? Does it live
the urchin founders will return and
they will descend from the clouds. Yeah. Like, finally, we are back home with our product.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of raises the question, right? Like, the whole reason why Google bought Urchin back in the day was to offer a free analytics tool so that people who were buying Google Ads could see the value of look, people clicked on your ad and then they purchased. Do you think that is even really happening today? Like, it, to the extent that it used to happen, right? Where people would be like, I see analytics. Well, like with everything that's going on around privacy and Apple, destroying cookies in the first party setting and third party cookies going away. Like, I feel like the benefit of having a free analytics platform to show the value of paid search ads is not as strong of a value proposition as it once was. Right. So like, I feel like that's part of their their lack of incentive for putting a lot of effort into Google Analytics is just that.
I don't know. I think that as somebody who works at an agency where clients spend a lot of money on ads, I think that the whole obsession with like proving the value of ads is still extremely strong. And even if you can't prove it 100%, if you can prove some of it, that's the value there. So even if it's not perfect, it's better than like nothing. And that's the thing that I think concerns people, because people are willing to spend money on SEO and not necessarily see results sometimes because it seems nebulous. But with ads, they're like, I Googled myself and I didn't see my ad come up. Why didn't I see my ad come up? Like, please don't Google yourself. First off here. But that happens still in 2023. People are still like, I Googled my keywords and my ad didn't come up. So I think that there's still like that strength there. And also, if you look at GA4, I make fun of this all the time in my training videos. Why are the multi-channel stuff under advertising? Like, we all know why. Even if you're not running ads, that's where it is. So it's just like Google's like trying to subliminally force you to buy Google Ads, I guess. Like, if you're not advertising, why are you using this tool? Clearly is the message Google is trying to send.
Well, so that is I think there's a very interesting angle there, and that is Google Analytics 4, in your view, a viable attribution platform? And I'll preface that by saying there was a time when Google came out with Google Attribution. They bought Odometry. Paul Pellman was there. He's now gone. There are these sort of moments that you can look at in the timeline and say, has Google given up on attribution in the platform? And the question I would have for you is, one, is it viable as an attribution platform? And then two, if not, why do we still have all this channel information in there?
Well, what is viable for attribution, I think, is my first question, right? Like, and this is, I think, is actually one of the other reasons why people hate GA4 is I think UA did a really good job of hiding how bad people's attribution was. And in GA4, it seems like it's more out in the open and people are like, this is garbage. Like, yeah, it's always been bad. You just didn't know until now. Like the fact that you can't track a whole bunch of the internet is a thing that I don't think people realize. Like 40% of Americans in the most recent survey I saw use ad blockers. I'm using one right now, ironically. It's just like lots of people use ad blockers. And I think that that's where people don't realize the actual issue with, like, you're only tracking maybe 60% of the people coming to your website in the first place. And then out of that 60%, half of them are using Safari. So you won't even know if it's them if they come back more than a week later. And then on top of it, so it's like, okay, so the only people you can actually track are the people who use Chrome, don't have an ad blocker, and are totally fine with you tracking all the things and have opted into all of Google's advertising stuff. That's a vanishingly smaller slice of the total number of people coming to your website. So the question is like, what is attribution? What can you actually attribute? And then I think one of the things we really work on with our clients is like, let's have a healthy dose of skepticism towards these results because we don't know for sure. You really need to focus on trends, not absolutes. And I think that is a big change that people have had to make, which has made people mad at GA4, but not because of GA4, because they've had to change the narratives as they have with clients where they're like, well, it said we had 30 conversions, but then I look in HubSpot and I see 50 conversions. Well, why is that? Well, there's 20 people using ad blockers and you can hide from analytics, but you can't hide from the fact that you actually filled out a form, you know? And I think that that is something where it's like those hard conversations to have with clients are difficult, and people may have just like glossed over them before being like, oh lol, I guess it didn't report anything that day, haha. And now, especially with the stuff with Apple and everything is happening kind of at the same time as GA4, I think it's all coming to a head in terms of like, what can we actually attribute? So if you're truly concerned about attribution, first off, like, I think you're going to have to get another hobby. Second of all, I say that gently. It's like, yeah, attribution is important, but you also need to look at, so for example, one of the things that we look at is percentage of sessions by channel. So, you know, organic was 40%, direct was 20%, paid was, 30%. And then we look at percentage of conversions by channel. So, 40% of the traffic was from organic, 20% of those people converted. Because if we can track their session, we know that at least we can track them. But if they're not converting, then we know something's wrong or right with that channel. And that's a much better measure of success than saying 13 people came in and converted. Like, I don't know if it was 13, it could have been 20, it could have been 6, like who knows the actual number. But if we look at the percentages instead, I think that's a much better way to actually measure what your marketing is doing. And that's something we really focus on in our reports. Like our first reports are all about conversion rate, because if I can track you and you came on the website, then I know if you converted. So rate is a much better metric than the volume of conversions. And then alternately, is each channel, each ad campaign, whatever, punching above or below its weight in terms of the volume of people that we can track that are coming to the website, knowing that there's also this like nebulous 40% out there that we can't track, but they're not showing up in analytics at all. So that's fine. We're just going to let that go, and we're going to focus on the things we can actually focus on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment, because there are some things that I've seen in GA4. For example, when an active session, when somebody's actively on the website and they come back and a second session begins, and in GA3 we would have looked at that and said, oh, they're now coming through affiliate, and of course you go through the checkout and you see the promo code, you go and find it, bring it back, and that was the sort of the affiliate hijacking moment in the checkout. And I've had a lot of folks come to me and like, our affiliate performance has dropped off. I'm like, your affiliate performance was always, nothing has really changed here. Just your ability to understand what is affiliate actively driving. It's not even an incremental measure, but it is a better measure, because affiliates are really not doing much of the lift there. If anything, there's someone was already going to purchase most likely, and they're just giving them the discount. But it's so like there are these positives, but to your overarching point, it's largely negative. And Jim and I are both recovering MTA-aholics, I would say, in terms of there was a time in both our journeys where we were just like, deterministic multi-touch attribution is the future. And now we're both really in on the sort of agile MMM wave, just because, we influence each other. So it becomes this very sick relationship that we have. But with that, now is the time to try and bridge that divide. So how do we as an industry become or adopt more of your mindset? What is it going to take to bridge that divide and to bring marketers to the light, to get them to go all in on GA4 like you are?
I think, I don't know if we're going to be able to bring them in all in, honestly. I think I've been giving talks called GA4, we're stuck with it now. I think that's just kind of where we're at with GA4. And people have kind of accepted, like, okay, this is a thing I have to use. I guess I'm going to learn about it. And I feel like that might be where some marketers are. And other people over time are like, oh, I can do that thing I wanted to do. Oh, I didn't know you could do this. So it's really an education piece. And so that's why I've been publishing so much, especially like the YouTube videos and stuff I've been posting on LinkedIn, to try to get education out there. Because one of the things that I also see are some really badly set up GA4s, which, is a disservice to the company you work for, or your agency side, like the clients that you work with. Like just because you hate it doesn't mean you should set it up badly, because then people are going to think GA4 is crap, when the reality is like you're set up with crap, garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of that, education, like I mentioned earlier, you're so prolific out there on LinkedIn posting things, but you've also created a course about GA4, but for agencies. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Analytics for Agencies. And so
Okay.
it does talk about GA4, but it also talks about Google Tag Manager, Google Google Ads, Facebook ads, like all the different stuff you would be using, and also puts together a full analytics plan for agencies as well. So how to manage multiple clients, but then how to rapidly deploy new analytics plans for clients so that you're not spending like days working through clients' analytics. And also how to do a discovery so you know what you're getting into before you actually quote a client and say it's going to be X number of dollars. Like then
Sure.
you know what you're getting into first.
Absolutely. It's that is one of the most ambiguous things that I think a lot of agencies deal with. As a client comes in and go, here's my challenge. And you're like, God, this could be an hour. It could be the next 3 months of my life.
Yeah.
How do I actually scope this effectively? But that's awesome. And I think even we do have a promo code, which will be in the show notes. So I think what is it, 20% off? Folks get using that promo code. Is that right?
Yep, 20% off if you use the code Measure Up. And there's also a link in
Awesome.
the show notes that will take you directly to the page. It already has a coupon code applied. And that's for team licenses as well as individual licenses.
Awesome.
Ooh,
Awesome.
bringing the value. Love it.
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
trying.
All those people who stuck around to almost the end. We this is the thing to get them to stay around for the
It
end. Right?
is. It is. Although I think we usually have some fun at the end, and we dive into an incremental insight. Unless Jim, are there any other questions you had for Dan about GA4?
No, you actually stole the words out of my mouth.
I'm so sorry. I felt
the,
like I was just like talking and talking, but I love this topic. It's
Yeah,
so
no.
interesting, and Dana is just such a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you for coming on to tell us, all of your thoughts about GA4. Like Simon mentioned, we like to end the show with an incremental insight. So it could be a book or a blog or a podcast or something some tool or thing that you've recently encountered that you think would be helpful for the audience. So do you have
Yeah,
one of
I
those?
just read the book Sales Pitch by April Dunford. And April Dunford, if you don't know her, she also wrote the book Obviously Awesome, which is about positioning and sales. Sales pitch is also about positioning, but it's in terms of how to write your sales pitch from start to finish. And I mean, she comes at it from more of a software perspective where agency size was not quite the same, but the methods that she uses are so clear. And I'm not a salesperson. I just sort of do sales because, there's this agency thing that I work at and we kind of need to get new clients, right? So sales sort of happens, but I'm not a very good salesperson at all. And I think that April's method of building, like how to build a sales process is brilliant. And it's a quick read. I read it on a flight from Vancouver to Toronto, which was only like 4 hours. So I strongly recommend checking it out. And it's on Amazon. She self-published it. So yeah, it's called Sales Pitch and it's by April Dunford. And if you get a chance to see April speak, do it. She is a fantastic speaker. I would say she's one of the most interesting, compelling speakers out there for sure.
Oh wow! And she
I'm
is also
sold.
Canadian, I believe.
She is, and I knew her like many years ago when I used to work in software in Toronto, and then we reconnected again at the Call to Action conference at Unbounce had
Oh,
in
that's
like
awesome.
2017. I think I'm like, I know you, but yeah, she just honestly those two books, Obviously Awesome and Sales Pitch, are just like especially if you're working in the SaaS space, like, and you haven't read those two books. Get them immediately and read them. It's everything you need to know about how to position, not just from a sales perspective, but marketing and everything else. Because there's always this tension, and I remember this from working in software of like, marketing says a thing or sales says a thing, and then the developers are like, "Oh, why did you say that? Now we have to develop it, right?" Or like
Yep.
marketing brings in leads, but the sales team can't close them because they're not good leads, and so sales is always saying things back to marketing, and they just are at each other all the time, and so April's method really helps to bridge that divide and making sure that your marketing and your sales are working really well together and that you keep your developers happy.
Awesome.
Awesome. I'm going to add
Yeah.
that to my
Maybe
cart.
Google should read it about GA4. I'm kidding. I'm sure you guys are fine. But yeah, I think that it's a lot of stuff I read. I was like, oh, this makes so much sense for the GA4 story. And she has this great story about like going to buy a toilet and how difficult it is actually to go buy a toilet because there's so many different options out there. And if no one explains to you what these different options mean, how are you possibly going to be able to feel like you've made the right decision? And it felt like that with GA4. And there's like all these different options, but no one is guiding you through that. So that's part of what we do with our education and stuff is like, you got to buy a toilet. Here's the one. Here's the one that might be right for you. You got to use analytics. Here's the option that might be right for you.
Awesome. I feel like Adobe Analytics is probably like one of those really fancy Japanese toilets that you see with like 12 buttons on top. And you're like, I don't know what 5 of these do, but I've got it and it's really cool. You're like,
Gotta
all
be
right.
careful.
Yeah,
Push the
I
wrong
was staying at
button.
an
Exactly.
Airbnb and they had one of those, and I was like, I'm scared of it. I don't think I'm going to use it. Like, I don't know what any of this does.
I haven't
It's
used
not
the
in
toilet in 3
English.
days. Yeah.
Like I'm gonna
GA4 is
use the toilet, but I'm not gonna touch any of the buttons or anything
Right.
because I don't want anything to happen.
With GA4, you just have to jiggle the handle. That's all. You just
Yeah.
jiggle the handle.
There you
it'll
go.
work.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, Dana, thanks so much for coming on the show. And Simon, any last words?
When the world gets you down, it's time to measure up.
Yes, I love it.
I don't know.
All right.
We're trying out taglines. We're trying to see what
pretty
works.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Bye.